All right, so let's get started. Again, welcome to Bates Botanical Bootcamp. Today we're talking about repotting houseplants. So there will come a time with all of your houseplants when they do need to be repotted. No houseplant can stay in the same pot forever. Those roots are going to grow, the plant gets larger, and if you don't repot it, it's going to lose nutrients, it's not going to be able to retain enough moisture, and eventually your plant will die, which nobody ever wants. So I've brought a few in today to repot, kind of show you how I do it, what techniques I use. We'll open for a brief Q&A towards the end, but feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. So let's get started. So when you go to a nursery and you choose your plant, just like this white star calathea that we have here, in the nursery. I bought this the other day and I haven't repotted it because I wanted to do it on this webinar. So it's going to come in a 4-inch pot. You see this nice little nursery pot. I've let it kind of acclimate to my house for the last few weeks, which I like to do with my houseplants before I repot them. It gives them time to get used to their new environment, and it doesn't shock them too much, taking them into a new environment and then immediately repotting them. So then I chose this nice little cute footed pot. You probably can't tell, but in the inside it does have a glaze. It looks terracotta, but it's glazed, so it's gonna help hold in moisture. There's so much science behind pots. So it's a little bit larger, as you can see, than the nursery pot. So you always wanna size up when you're repotting. You never wanna go smaller. If you like the pot, you think you can cram that plant in there, it's just not going to be happy. It's gotten used to the pot size that it's already in, and you'll need to go larger. Unless you are splitting it, then you can go smaller. So I'm going to start by removing the price tag because nobody wants that in their soil. So a lot of the pots here and probably all around town are going to have a plastic plug in the bottom. When you purchase it, always make sure you take that out unless you're using it as a cachet. Pops right out. It's just going to make sure water drains out of the pot, and it's not going to hold in water and then eventually give your plant root rot or root damage. So we're ready. We've got our pot. We took our plug out. This pot has a drain hole. It's a little bit larger than the nursery pot, so I'd say we're ready to go. So I like to use our Earth Mix Indoor Proganics Eye that we have here at Bates Nursery. So I'm going to pop this bad boy open. Try not to spill it everywhere. And we'll take a look at this soil real fast. I've started using this. I used it before I worked here, but since I started, it's really the only thing I use for my houseplants. I do make mixtures for my cacti and succulent soil. I use this as a base, mix perlite, sometimes pine fines to help with drainage, but this is a great product that all of my plants really do love. So I'm going to start by putting some in the bottom of this pot because we don't want the plant to drop all the way to the ground. We want the bottom of the pot. We want somewhere for the roots to grow into. So we want to cover the bottom of your pot just a little bit, just enough to get that plant raised slightly. Right, we're going to set this down so I don't pour it everywhere. All right, so I've got to start here. I've got my soil in the bottom. You don't really have to pack it in too much. You want the roots to be able to breathe a little bit. And so now I'm going to come to my plant. I don't want to just hold the pot and pull the plant up because you're going to risk damaging it, maybe ripping the plant itself off of the roots. So I usually start by loosening up the soil around it. And if it is really root bound, sometimes I will take the pot, tip it on its side and press through. Or you can even take like a butter knife, something not too sharp because you don't want to cut your plant or yourself. To loosen up the soil around the pot. Then I'm going to lift it out. And as you can see, this is getting close to time to repot this anyways. You can see the roots were actually starting to grow out of the pot in the bottom. So it'll actually be pretty happy that it's going into a new home. So I'm going to loosen up the roots, loosen up the soil a little bit so it can get into that new soil. One thing, so many things about repotting your plants, but when you put that new soil in, it's going to have nutrients that the plant has probably already absorbed from what it was in before you repotted it. So I'm loosening it up, getting the roots all nice And then I'm gonna drop it down in the pot. Ooh, we sized that pretty correctly there. Look at that. Now, I wanna fill in around the sides. And I kind of use my fingers to press down in to really get the dirt in there so you don't have a bunch of big air pockets. Because what's gonna happen when you go to water it, that soil is gonna compact a little bit and your plant's gonna droop and look a little bit sad. So I usually start by packing in the sides. So my plant's gonna stand up a little bit taller. And then I'll go back in and refill. And make a nice big mess. One thing, little pro tip for you, that I do like to use for my smaller houseplants, the boxes that we have here at Bates at the front checkout, that we usually put smaller plants in that you purchase. I usually keep one around as a repotting box because it helps contain all that soil because you don't want to lose it. It's good soil and you also don't want to mess up your space. All right, so I've got that all potted up. So one more thing I need to do is I always water right after I repot my plants. So I have this nice bottled water. I'm just gonna take it, pour a little bit on. Calatheas like to stay fairly moist. They like high humidity. So it's really important to keep them watered. Again, this is a White Star Calathea. She's gorgeous. She's got, I don't know if you can see, there we go. Those pink leaves, when they come out, such a pretty color. Ooh. So she's all potted up, and actually I'm always surprised when I repot my plants. They already look bigger and healthier than when I started. So that's our first plant we're gonna pot today. So with that one, we just went from a nursery pot. We sized up just a little bit. When you get your plant at the nursery, I usually kind of feel the pot to see how root bound it is. If it is super root bound, you'll want to size up just a little bit more. But with a pot this size, like 4 to 6 inches, I would never size more than an inch, inch and a half. The problem you run into when you size up too big, that pot is going to retain too much moisture because there's too much soil and the roots aren't that big yet. And like I discussed earlier, you're going to run the risk of root damage, root rot, killing your plant. So usually with these smaller nursery pots, I size up 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches, depending on the plant and how root bound it is. All right. Tyler, do we have any questions?
Not right now, but if you just submit them to the chat, or if you're watching on Facebook, you can comment a question and I'll relay it to Caroline.
Yeah, I'm here for all of your questions. All right, we're gonna put this bad girl up here. I was really excited when these pots came in too, by the way. Zoom in on that, Tyler. Take a gander at that. Well, we got water right there. Again, it has that terracotta look, which I love, but it's glazed in the inside. So it's not gonna wick too much moisture out of the soil. I use terracotta for my cacti and succulent. When it comes to like leafy plants, I usually stay away from that because you're gonna have to water it more. So I've brought in a cane angel wing begonia from my house that I propped. It's been in this nursery pot probably for a couple months, and it's about time for this to be repotted. It's not too root bound, but these do grow quickly. And now's the time of year when you want to be repotting things. You want to be repotting when it's warm outside. I usually go with late spring, early summer when the plants are really growing, or right before they take off. Usually steer clear of repotting your houseplants in the winter. They're dormant and it's just not the best time. So if you noticed, I have this begonia in a nursery pot, and it was sitting in a cachet. So like I was talking about before, if you have a pot that doesn't have a drain hole or has one of those plugs and you don't want to take it out, I would suggest keeping it in the nursery pot and dropping it in there. This pot does not have a drainage hole, so I just drop the nursery pot inside. I like a cachet. It helps, especially with plants that like to stay pretty moist. A lot of my ferns I keep in nursery pots in a cachet so they can keep a little bit of water because I am bad about watering sometimes and my plants will dry out. So I've chosen this nice little pot that's about 1 inch in diameter on the top, larger than what this begonia is in right now. So as you can see, there is a size difference. Again, you always want to size up. And I'm going to start by taking the drain hole out and the price tag off.
Oops.
Hi, Tyler.
Hi. We do have a question. I've seen several repotting videos where they knock off as much of the current dirt as possible before putting into the new soil.
Yeah.
When do you need to do that, and how do you know when the current soil needs to be completely replaced?
So completely replacing the current soil, if you do have some kind of fungus in your soil or the plant has a problem that you can't identify, I always suggest just changing out the soil and rinsing out the roots completely. If the plant has been in that pot, say a year or two, and it's really root bound and it clearly has taken all the nutrients out of that soil, I'll usually change out most of it and knock it off the roots. Now with the one that I just repotted, the Calathea, since it came in that nursery pot, it wasn't really root bound. I usually leave about half the soil on. So it has that soil that it's been basically growing up in, and then I mix that new soil in to help add nutrients and just fluff it up a little bit. So good question. So completely change it out if you have some kind of issue with your plant, fungus, some kind of bacteria, something. Again, if you can't identify it, it always helps to completely change out the soil, rinse your plant roots, or if it's really root bound, knock off as much as you can just to get a nice fresh start. But wonderful question. Are there any more before I start potting? I mean, I can always answer questions while I'm potting up.
Looks like we're good for the moment.
Perfect. All right. So, gonna get my dirt down here. Wow, I've got a pot, so you're gonna lose me for a second. All right, now I'm back. So, I'm gonna just fill the bottom. This one is a little bit deeper, so I'm gonna have to put more soil in here. And like I talked about earlier, I repotted this like a month and a half ago. So it's still in pretty good soil. Like the nutrients are still gonna be there. So we're not gonna have to take too much of that existing soil off of the plant. I wish I had a plant that was really root bound, but we will talk about that in a moment.
Speaking of nutrients, why don't you talk about the soil mix that you're using right now?
Oh yeah, I am using our Earth Mix Organics I, which we do sell here at Bates Nursery. And actually right now, unless I'm mistaken, I believe it is 10% off.
Yes.
Until next Thursday.
Yes, it is. And just about everything at the nursery, except for, I think, gift cards and deliveries are.
So it's just a blend specifically made for indoor plants. It's going to help with drainage. It's got some perlite in it, like I was discussed earlier. When I do my cacti and succulents, I do use this soil. I just mix in perlite, sometimes pine fines, sometimes a little bit of sand, just to help with drainage and airflow to the roots, because this isn't designed specifically for that type of plant. But it's great. It's got the nutrients your plants need. It's formulated the right way for houseplants to thrive and be happy. And actually on one of our other things that we do here at Bates Nursery, the home show, we discussed those soils a few weeks ago, and I brought in 2 of the exact same ferns, one potted in some indoor soil that I got at just a big box store, and then one potted in our Earth Mix Organics I. And the difference between those 2 plants, I was surprised by. It was wild. Tyler, you saw it.
I did. It was rather remarkable. Mm-hmm. But it's a really light mix. I actually potted my citrus plants into that.
I've used that for my citrus too.
And it's just when you handle it, it feels like it's a really good.
I mean, we can get a
soil.
close up on the soil if you want.
Okay. There you go.
Bring it in. Yeah, there it is. So this is what I use, and Tyler. With my citrus trees, I did use this. I mixed in some. I'm a fan of pine fines. I did mix in some pine fines with that.
Yes.
All right.
Speaking of what's in the pot, Julie is asking on Facebook, what is in the bottom of the pot, a hole or a rock or anything?
So in this pot is a hole. If you have a cachet or if you have something that requires a lot of drainage and drier soil, you can always put rocks in the bottom, lava rocks, just something to get it up above if you fear that it's going to be sitting in too much moisture. I always tell people to steer clear of potting directly in a cachet. So this one that I did take the angel wing begonia out of is a cachet. It doesn't have a drain hole. So if you were to pot something in it, I would probably only do like a fern or something that does require constant moisture or likes a lot of moisture. But if you do want to be brave and go wild, that's when I would put rocks or something in the bottom of that pot to help with drainage, because it can get a little dangerous. I do have one plant in a cachet, a pot that doesn't have a drain hole. It's my Hartley Fern, because those do have to stay moist all the time, and it's one of the hardest houseplants to keep alive, but I managed to keep it alive through the winter. So again, I'm going to loosen the soil. This one's not root bound. It's not too tight, because again, I did just pot this propagation up just a few months ago or so. So I'm going to take it out. I'm going to mix some of that old soil in, loosen up the roots a little bit so they can breathe and start spreading into their new home, and just place that plant down in. If you have a big plant, it always helps to have extra hands to stabilize and hold it up. And I've got a few tips on that at the end. And then again, I'm going to fill around the edges with the new soil. And sometimes I like to kind of get my fingers in and mix it into the roots a little bit. And with that older soil, if you did keep some on the root ball, press down. I find this very therapeutic. I love repotting plants. I probably do it more than I need to do it. And you want it to be fairly tight in there so it's holding the plant up and stabilizing, but you don't want to pack it down so much that the plant doesn't have room to breathe and grow. It's kind of finding that happy balance. All right. And then with this one, so she's drooping over a little bit, and if you can see, since I repotted it, you can kind of see how fast this grows. This new shoot shot up probably just a couple weeks ago from that prop. So I brought in a little stake so I can stake basically the mama up so this new growth can do its thing and keep going. So I'm going to take this bamboo stake, put it pretty near the base of the plant. I don't like to get too close because I don't want to hurt those roots too much. Sometimes I just kind of let it stay on the stake without tying or taping it up, because usually they'll start growing up a little bit more. But for the sake of this one, and because I have to travel home with it, I am going to tie it. So we've got this nice, I believe it's vinyl tie here at Bates Nursery.
That's it.
I'm going to bring this around. If you're staking a tree, you can get pretty tight with it. But like with this cane, angel wing begonia, it's so fragile that I'm not going to tie it too tight. All I want is just to help it stay up.
Can you spin that just a little bit so it can...
Yeah. Wait, let's go this way. Here, maybe this way. We'll see if I can tie. Oh, this is going to be fun. These break so easily. I had one that was probably like over 3 feet tall, and my husband knocked it over and broke it and felt terrible. It was sad. I wasn't mad, but I propped all the things that broke off of it, and now I have probably 5 of these plants now.
I was just about to say, yeah, that's just a propagation opportunity.
Yeah, these angel wing, like the cane begonias, are so easy to prop. Sometimes they take a moment for the roots to take off, as much as like a month and a half. But if you haven't ever propped stuff, it's something that's really fun to get into. with a lot of things, as long as you take the cutting and have like a node, basically it looks like new growth or a root coming out. Stick it in water. I don't use rooting hormone a ton. I use it with a few things, but like my angel wing begonia, I just use distilled water and she goes wild. So again, this was just from a cutting. I repotted it 1.5, 2 months ago, and I went ahead and potted it up a bigger size because it was growing so quickly. And I have our Proganics eye to partially thank for that because I haven't even fertilized it yet. And this is all the new growth. You can actually see this was probably the top leaf on the cutting I took. And this is all the new growth. So yeah, so she's happy. And we'll bring her to the side. So I don't have a plant that's really root bound with us today, but by root bound, what I mean is when you pull that plant out of the pot or when you're at the nursery trying to select something, if you go and, slightly, don't like destroy the pot, but squeeze that a little bit to see if it has some give. If it doesn't have any give or doesn't have a lot, usually that means it's root bound. If the roots are growing out of the bottom of the pot or even coming out of the top, that's a good sign that that plant at that nursery or at your house is root bound and needs to go ahead and be repotted. Also, if water is just running straight through your plant when you water it, it's not really absorbing that moisture. Or if it just really isn't growing. Those are a few signs that it needs to be repotted and it's gotten fairly root bound. So if you have a plant that's significantly root bound, you pull it out of the pot. Sometimes I've had to cut the plants out of the nursery pot. Don't worry about hurting the roots. You actually want to break them up. Once you get that nursery pot, whatever pot it's in, off of the plant, you can use your hands to kind of pull the roots apart. Let them breathe. It's going to promote new growth. So I've had to take knives or scissors to my plants before just to cut on them. You don't want to cut all the roots off. And if you find that like main tap root that's in there, try to leave that intact as much as you can. But you want to break it up so it can get into that new soil, start growing, start absorbing the water, that moisture, all the nutrients. It'll really help your plant thrive and not just survive. So, do we have any other questions?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Well, Tyler, do you have any questions or comments on repotting things?
Yeah, I mean, when a plant is root bound, it seems to me like when they hit the bottom, some of them even just turn back up and start growing up the walls of the pot.
They kind of grow. Sometimes it's kind of cool and really pretty how they'll grow, but they'll kind of grow along the bottom of the pot. You can see where they're kind of reaching to find where they can go, and if they can't go anywhere, they're going to start growing. I'm just dancing with my hands, growing up towards the top of the pot. So, and that's kind of how, like, if you've gone to maybe transplant a tree or you've had some annuals that you're pulling out, you'll see how they're growing into cracks in your yard or growing through like stone walls or plants that grow in cracks in sidewalks or a driveway. Like those roots will figure out where they need to go for the health of the plant.
Awesome. We do have a question from Patricia on Facebook. So you mentioned distilled water. Mm-hmm. Does that make a difference in growth rather than using tap water?
It does. What I like about it is it doesn't have chemicals. It doesn't have anything that could harm the plant in the water. It's distilled. I believe that process, they just let the water sit and all the sediment and stuff comes to the bottom and it's the top part. I also will use spring water. I just honestly don't trust my tap water at home for my plants. I have used tap water and I honestly didn't notice a huge difference, but there are some things that I go for distilled water with.
I don't think distilled water has any minerals in it, like calcium and things like that. Mm-hmm. And it definitely doesn't have like chlorine or fluoride or anything in it.
Yeah, I think the process is the water sits in it. I could be totally wrong about the process of distilled water.
Well, there is a vapor distillation.
I'm not going to go into water science right now, mm-hmm. but basically tap water has all those chlorine, everything in it. That's just removed from it. Mm-hmm.
Another question. I had a Chinese evergreen that had 3 small plastic pods within the nursery pot. What's the best way to deal with that? I ended up cutting the small ones off. I also have a Ficus Audrey that has foam all around the individual shoots.
Did you say plastic pods?
It's 3 small plastic pods.
On the roots?
She said they look like aqua pods. So is that like a watering mechanism, or some of our plants come with like a pest deterrent, that comes in a little...
That comes with it, but is she talking about like in the dirt? Is she still with us? I hope.
It was within the dirt.
It was within the dirt. I've never actually done anything like that or used anything like that. Did you say you separated them?
Yes.
That should be fine. Separate them and just put them in some new soil. And you could probably remove that if you wanted to, if it's not going to damage the roots or the plant stock at the base of it too much. Was there another question too? I feel like maybe I missed something.
She said, yeah, I cut them off. Just seemed weird to have those.
It does seem strange. My brain was going to a few places for a second. I would take them off. I don't really like stuff to be under the soil line in my plants. I like to see what's going on. So. Yes,
and there was, let's see, do I need to take off the foam around the ficus shoots? I haven't repotted that one yet.
That was the question. Yeah, that's what it was. I would take that off for sure. Like I remove stuff like that, and sometimes I will even rinse the roots off before I put the new soil in. Yeah, there's some nurseries. I actually repotted a plant for a customer last week, and it had like the foam in it. I think it's just to help stabilize it, and it's usually in like a mixed planter setting that you would get at like a grocery store or from just like a florist. But when I repot stuff like that, I remove all the foam.
She said the foam is in the dirt.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just to help like
stabilize it or
bulk it up. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How do you know when it's time to put your plant in a bigger pot? Will it just not grow bigger if I just keep it in the same pot?
It will not grow bigger. The signs are roots coming out of the bottom, roots coming out of the top. It'll stop growing. It'll slow down first. It won't be growing as quickly as when you got it. Even if you fertilize it, it's not going to grow as fast. Eventually it will stop growing, and then it's going to start dying. Plants can't stay in the same container forever. They'll usually start dying. I've noticed with mine, like at the base, the leaves will start yellowing and browning, and then it'll just work its way up. So that's a very good sign that it's time to repot if it's just not doing anything, and then if it does start dying. But you can always just lift your pot up and see, if you see roots coming out of the bottom, that's usually a good sign. There are some plants that like to be root bound. I keep my cacti in the same pots for probably about 3 years to let them really get secure in there before I repot those. Some of them I repot every season.
Speaking of root bound, how about orchids? Because they seem to be mostly roots.
They are mostly roots. They do like to be contained. I have one orchid that's been in the same, it's just in that clear plastic container that I got it in, and it's been in that for probably about 2 years, and it's happy. It's pushing out. I'm going to repot it this season, but a good sign for orchids is when those aerial roots start kind of growing up and getting really crazy and growing out of the pot. That's usually when I say it's time to repot you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, if there's any other questions, we'll go ahead and start winding down and wrapping up. I want to thank everybody for joining us for our webinar series. We kind of took a hiatus because we were very busy in the spring this year, and we're happy to be back at it. We're going to be adding more on our website, batesnursery.com, and I can provide the link there so you can check it out. If you click on register now on the main page, it'll take you to the page where you can sign up for the other webinars that we have going on, and also our newsletter for webinars.
Yeah, I think we have hydrangeas coming up, summer hydrangeas next week.
Yes, well, and before that one, we have drought tolerant plants, which is
Ben.
What a timely thing, you know, because right now we've been really dry, thankful to get that rain, but you know, you want a plant that can survive in between these dry periods that we have sometimes.
One of my favorites
in Middle
is
Tennessee.
yucca.
Yeah,
you can't kill that thing.
It
could kill you if you fall into it.
I've mowed over my yucca.
Really?
Yes, and it still comes back. It's crazy.
It's still there. It's
and
still
also,
going strong.
Autumn Joy sedum, you know, that thing, I don't have to do anything with it. It's happy.
It just goes wild. I guess too, if like you ever have anyone has a topic for a webinar that they want to throw out there. I know that you've put polls, Tyler's put polls out to see what people want to learn about. So
yes,
you can always message us.
Yes, feel free to send us a message on our Bates Nursery Instagram account or send an email to info@batesnursery.com, and we'd be happy to accept your contributions. A question just came out. What is the plant in front of you, Caroline?
The one on my right is a angel wing begonia. It's a cane begonia. It's one of my favorite house plants that I have. I've had it for years. This is actually a prop that I took off my mother plant, which I talked about a little earlier when my husband knocked it over and broke it into pieces. But it was a blessing in disguise. It's gorgeous. There's a lot of different varieties. Usually they have the spots on the leaves, and then they'll be red underneath. This one will get, my mother plant was like at least 3 feet tall, not including the pot, before it kind of broke, but they grow quickly. They have really gorgeous pink flowers that drape a little bit. I'm trying to see if, no, that's a new leaf. This one isn't blooming right now. They're a little bit hard to find, but super easy to prop. You can probably find them online, and just get a small one. They grow quickly and you can make more plants out of them. And this one on my left is a white star calathea. So, and again, just to kind of sum up, if you were a little bit late getting in, repotting your houseplants, you always want to have a drain hole unless you're feeling brave, totally fine, but I would suggest putting rocks or something in the bottom or just using it as a cachet. Signs that it's time to repot your houseplant. Roots are coming out of the bottom, roots are coming out of the top, no growth, slow growth, or the plant is dying. Another good time to repot would be if your plant is showing signs of some kind of fungus and you can't identify it, or there's just something going on with it and maybe you've tried, to research it, talk to people, can't figure out what it is. Good thing to always do is take the plant off, knock off all of the soil because that might be your problem, rinse off the roots and get a whole new bag of different soil and repot that plant. If it's root bound, break up those roots. Even if it's not, when you repot it, you want to loosen that soil. So you still have a little bit of the old soil, but mix it in with the new so it can really get those nutrients. And then water it after you pot it, which I did not water this one, but you want to remember, you can kind of see that the leaves are starting to droop a little bit. That usually happens after you repot it because it's going through a little bit of shock. And a lot of plants will take time to adapt to that new soil, to their new pot. So you're not going to see new growth right away. Usually it'll take a little while before those roots kind of sink in and the plant itself starts showing growth. So I hope we answered all your questions. If you have any more, you can always call, email, find us on Instagram. Tyler's our Instagram queen, so he will
yes.
He will relay those questions if he can't answer them. But yeah, so thanks for joining us this morning and stay tuned for more webinars. All right, bye.